Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 364 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is Mahmoud Ahmed, a British psychotherapist and writer whose work invites us to think more deeply about the relationship between mental health, culture and lived experience. Mahmoud is particularly known for his reflections on Islamophobia and racism and for reminding us that emotional distress doesn't exist in a vacuum but is shaped by the social and political worlds we live in. His work gently challenges therapists to reflect on power, identity and difference, and to practice in ways that are thoughtful, ethical and genuinely inclusive. He joins us today to discuss his latest contribution to the field of psychotherapy, his new book, A New Introduction to Counselling and Psychotherapy, embedding context, diversity and equity at the heart of therapeutic practice. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 364 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. Rory and I are going to be walking you through three topics today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice. And I think a topic of the age. We're going to be speaking about, will AI replace counsellors and psychotherapists? Is AI coming for your job? And then we go into practice matters. That's already been beautifully introduced by Rory. We have Mahmoud Ahmed again with his new book, A New Introduction to Psychotherapy, so make sure you stick around for that. And then into student services, recognising students on your formal journey, where today we're speaking about when counselling training ends, but wait for it, you haven't completed your hours yet. You haven't got those final hours in for your course. How do you manage that time? So we're going to be looking at that today. So starting off, ethical, sustainable practice. Rory, this is a topic that I see again and again and again in our Facebook group. It's this, will AI come and take counsellors and psychotherapists' job? What's your thoughts on this, Rory?
Well, it's the Terminator scenario, isn't it? You know, the film Terminator, where the machines take over. And I was thinking a lot about this because I too saw the discussions, some of them very heartfelt discussions in the Facebook page. And if you want to know where our Facebook page is, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us there. In fact, there was one person who was writing who opined you might as well give up because AI will take it all. And I've, over the last few days, I've been studying attachment, and I came across a film called Good Will Hunting by Matt Damon. Matt Damon wrote it, and it was played by the late, great Robin Williams. And I would ask anybody, you can find this on YouTube, to look for the scene when Matt Damon, who's the client, a young, brilliant man, is a client, and Robin Williams, who is his therapist, Sean, is sat on the seat. And Robin Williams, the therapist, was getting rather frustrated about this young man who was a genius. No doubt about it, the guy was a genius. And Robin Williams said this: So if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo, you know a lot about him, life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientations, the whole work, right? But I bet you can't tell me what it smells to be like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at the beautiful ceiling and seen that. If I ask you about a woman, you've probably given me the syllabus of your personal favourites. You can tell me you've been laid a few times, but you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. And I played that again and again and again. And that is the heart of therapy, that human connection. You know, certainly AI is very smart and I use it in my day-to-day work. But I do feel like it is a little bit like Matt Damon. It is a very smart person, but it has no soul. It'll never love. It'll never feel loss. It is a machine. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. But I will yield to Ken, who is rather an expert in this field. Over to you, Ken.
Wow. Yeah, it's an interesting time, Rory. It really is. And I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but it's certainly a topic that is very dear to my heart. I do a lot of research in this area. And I'm very fortunate to sit on the expert reference group for ethical use of AI in counselling and psychotherapy, along with our ethical bodies, talking about what this might look like. And there is, I guess, in the absence of a clear path forward, we fill it with conjecture. We fill that with fear, is usually a human emotion that we might put to something that we can't see, something that may be very, very disruptive. But we can look at what is actually happening at the moment, what research is being done, what papers are being published, what is in trial at the moment, to get an idea and a feeling for where this might go. And specifically focusing on us as counsellors, psychotherapists, or working within mental health in general. And I think the first question that we need to answer when we're considering this topic is, what do we mean will be replaced by AI? And I think that's a really important, it might sound like a small thing. What do you mean by replaced by AI? But I think that this is the crux of it. What do you mean when you think counsellors being replaced by AI? What are you seeing? So I have no doubt, and in fact, I'm almost 100% sure that counsellors and psychotherapists are going to be using AI ethically within their practice. But it will be a human using AI to amplify who they are and what they do, rather than replacing who they are and what they do. So how can I say this? Well, I can say this with some confidence because there are already applications that are in trial within the NHS right now for mental health. And part of that is talking therapies. And they're looking at how this is accepted, how this plays out, and what the benefits can be. And it's if I'm honest, Rory, it's a pretty... It's looking pretty good in terms of the outcomes that they're getting from what they're putting out. But I do need to say now that what I'm speaking about are tools for assessment, triaging, yes, and there are some coaching tools that can be used around CBT for exercises, explaining those exercises again, helping people to maybe stay engaged with what has been suggested by the counsellor in between sessions. That seems to be the pathway that this is going down at the moment, Rory, from what I can see.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ken. I think that what I would call the back office function of counselling, things like booking appointments, things like sending out Core 10 or PHQ-9s, and doing the kind of quantitative side of that. So you send out a Core 10 form, and then you look back, and then you've got to work out the weighting, what's really been said by the client. That can be done by AI. And I also think that that coaching element is an interesting part. I've taken an interest in dialogical behavioural therapy, DBT, and part of that, and I'm no expert by any means, Ken, but is asking people to think: are there any other explanations to something that's happened? So I'll give you an example of that. My granddaughter was sat on the swing the other day in the park. We went with mum and my wife and the grandkids, and she shouted to mum. Mum couldn't hear her. And she said, "Mum's ignoring me." And I said, is there any other thing that you could think of why Mum's not talking to you? And she said, "Well, she's too far away." So I said, "Well, which one is it likely to be?" And she said, "She's too far away. She can't hear me." And that is the basis of some of the work, I believe, in DBT. That could be used, in between sessions. So somebody has an intrusive thought, they go to their AI consult, they put in what's happened, and it asks a series of questions that could be used for coaching. And this, to be honest, this isn't just AI. When I worked for Mind many years ago, they were introducing something called Beating the Blues, which was a computer-based CBT program, which was, people would turn up, and for those who wish to access CBT, or CBT may be useful for them, cognitive behavioural therapy, they would use a computer, and the computer would do the same thing, ask them if there's any other options to where they're thinking. So I do think that we're in a very early stage of AI and mental health, and I think it'll find a place. I'm old enough to remember where people thought that computers would take over everybody's work. And I remember the millennium bug, where people literally thought the world was coming to an end. And for those of you who are not old enough to remember the millennium bug, it was when we came to the year 2000, there was a great belief that what would happen would be that all the computers in the world would stop, and aeroplanes would fall out of the sky, and trains would stop, and the TV would go off, and electricity supplies. Everybody held their breath, and year 2000 came and went. And you never guess what? We're still here. So I think there's a lot of concern about it, a lot of fantasy maybe being played out in people's minds.
Yes.
And I think eventually it'll just find a place. It'll settle. And I don't think the human connection will ever disappear, quite honestly. I hope not.
Well, I guess I hope so too, Rory. I really do.
We have to hope.
I really do hope so too. And I guess where this technology differs from Y2K and anything that we may have seen before is this is very real. At the moment, the biggest investment into infrastructure is in AI and AI technologies in data centers. And we're talking about trillions. And massive decade-long build-outs. So it's not going away, and it is only going to advance. But in the same way as when a mobile phone first came out, it was very difficult to imagine what a modern-day mobile phone with apps and an app store might look like, because it didn't exist at that time, and it was very difficult to imagine that may come. But I remember when mobiles came out, there were many people that were reluctant to pick up a mobile phone. And then when it went from smartphones when it went from the dumb phone, the hold in your hand speak only phone, to a smartphone, there was another challenge for many going, I'm not going to the smartphone because it tracks more of your data. And there was all those concerns. Yet now, I guess everybody has a smartphone on them. And I think as we look forward, this uptake of AI, it is going to roll out. And I want to just be really clear here when I'm speaking about this. When we're speaking about AI, we're not speaking about chatbots. We're not talking about what you may think of as AI when you go to ChatGPT or to Claude or to any of those off-the-shelf versions of LLMs, as they are called. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about custom-built tools that will be built by technology companies under scrutiny from experts and data professionals and the NHS, that we will use in counselling and psychotherapy. And it will be more of a cognitive co-pilot. It will be lifting the burden, taking away the things that are, I guess, outsourceable. Now, the thing that is not outsourceable is your connection with that client, that human-to-human connection. Rory's already mentioned empathy, intuition, reading subtle cues. GPT is no good at that. It is a knowledge, or AI is no good at that. It is a knowledge engine. It's very good at saying, if I give you X information, it can say, yes, I can research that and find Y information. But that is information. And as we know as counselors and psychotherapists, it's not information that helps our clients. It is that relationship and what they discover themselves. If it was as easy as us just saying to a client, oh, you're struggling a little bit with depression, well, all you need to do is X, Y, and Z, and it's happening because of this, and there you go, off you go now. Well, then we would we would be living in a very different world. But it doesn't work like that. It requires that human connection. Now, when we speak about the general shift or the adoption of AI, and I'm referring to a little bit of research here, and there's differing research depending on different places that you look. But the research that I looked at was looking at the people being born today. As they come into this world where AI has been generally adopted, there may be more open to interacting with a bot for therapy. Whereas I guess if you spoke to the general population at the moment, they are more interested in speaking to a real person if they're seriously looking for therapy. However, and I think this is really, really important, there is a massively high usage of the chatbots, the LLMs, the ChatGPTs, where the general public are using it for as therapy. They're asking it therapeutic questions. They're asking it what they should do in their life and for guidance and for advice. Now, what happens in that kind of a situation is it's going to give flawed information, biased information, information that is not aligned to that person. And this has happened in the past, and there are a number of lawsuits happening right now, and more to come, with companies that build LLMs, where in the extreme cases, people have taken their own lives because of the interactions that they've had with these LLMs. And what is happening is that the companies making these LLMs are realizing this needs to stop. They can see that damage, and they're putting guardrails on which will stop just chatbots, off-the-shelf chatbots, from acting and giving guidance and advice specifically around mental health and therapy-related topics. And I think that's a good sign. I think that is the actual builders of this technology going, whoa. And, you know, I'd love to think that they were doing that because they really care and they want the best for humanity. But I think it's all about lawsuits and money at the end of the day. Oh, we better stop it doing that.
You don't believe that, do you, Ken?
Yeah, it's So I wanted to speak about the market explosion, because I think it's in context of the market explosion, Rory, is that AI mental health market is projected to grow from, listen to this, because this is eye-watering. I can't understand these numbers, Rory. Maybe you can. 1 billion in 2023, that's kind of turnover for mental health market, to 10 billion by 2032. And most of that growth is going to be driven by global demand for scalable solutions. And scalable solutions is automation, AI solutions. So there's definitely a massive market and a lot of interest, and a lot of overseas companies vying for the UK's business on this at government level, at NHS level. So it is all very new, but here's the kicker. At the end of the day, this is about what we do is not just a transactional conversation. We are there and we are held by ethical and legal boundaries as counselors and psychotherapists. We're called upon to do defensible decision making when in some cases, and I'm sure you've had this, you might not know what decision to make. It might be an ethical dilemma. So how can we expect that AI would make such a decision? And if it got it wrong, who would be accountable? That's where it becomes interesting. And I think that's why when I look forward, I'm really optimistic about counselling and psychotherapy. I think that AI is going to displace so many within their profession. I think there's going to be entire sectors wiped out. I see a tsunami of pain and disruption coming. And I think counsellors and psychotherapists are going to be one of the few who, if we can ride the wave and learn to adopt AI and learn the tools we need to learn, the ethical use of, which is not in between us and the client, that we're one of the protected professions. And that is only my thought, and it's also my hope, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting you talk about the global rise in the amount spent on mental health. And I think the reason for that is, well, I know the reason for that is as more countries industrialize, their mental health goes worse. If you look at the top industrialized countries in the world, America, UK, their mental health is exponentially worse. People's mental health is worse in industrialized countries. And as more countries from the developing world industrialize, then almost certainly, there's going to be a rise in mental health issues. The two tend to go hand in hand. And I think my observations on the use of AI, I think that therapists should lean into it. It might be something that people don't want to engage with. It might be seen as almost the enemy. But I think you're more employable if you know about AI and can use it at some level than if you don't. And I think the people who will retain work and be more employable in the future in the world of counselling and psychotherapy will be those with a knowledge of how to use AI. And that could be things like automated assessments, triaging, that type of thing, even understanding referral pathways to where an AI system may be really useful for a client, supporting coaching, that type of thing, where you can just log on. And as I mentioned dialectic behavioural therapy, because part of that, I believe, is a coaching element where if someone becomes a little concerned, they could just phone up a coach. Well, you can't have a coach on call 24 hours a day. But if an AI could do that just to help people get a sense of what they're thinking, I could see the use in that. I think all in all, our profession is evolving and changing in ways, maybe, Ken, that we didn't envisage when we were teaching, and certainly I didn't envisage at all when I was a student. But our profession has come of age. When I was a student, they talked about it being an emerging profession, like a little flower starting to bloom. Well, the bloody thing's bloomed now, and it's a whole garden, and it needs tending to, quite frankly. And I think that there's lots of changes within the profession that are now being seen, be that scope ed, be that the use of AI, be that the use of the new ideas of EDI and inclusion in terms of seeing people as different and unique. So I think my hope would be, and maybe our travelling optimism would be, that I think we're still in a healthy position. But I would reiterate that those who don't know about AI or shy away from it might be the more vulnerable ones amongst us. I think you're going to have at some point to engage with AI. It's a bit like, say, I had a colleague many years ago who wouldn't engage with email, didn't like it. And I would imagine that would have been pretty difficult for that person to seek employment, because we use it every day. You cannot go to a job and say, well, I don't like email, I'd rather write a letter. They'd say, well, I'm afraid, maybe the job's not for you. So I see it as that, but I would say don't worry. And as that Robin Williams quote that I started at the top of the podcast with, I think that's where therapy lives, to be honest. That's where it lives, in that relational connection.
100% couldn't agree with you more, Rory. And I like the don't worry. It's that I think that is the takeaway for this, for the question of, will AI replace therapists? If it does, I don't think that it will be within my practice lifetime or yours. It may somewhere deep in the future, because we don't know where AI is going to go, in the same way as when the first mobile phone came out, we couldn't have even imagined what the smartphones of today can do and what that technology might look like. But I think what we need to do is we need to recognize what we can do. We can only control the controllables. It's up to the government, it's up to levels higher than us to set the agendas, to put the laws in place. Of course, we have a voice in that, and certainly we at Counselling Tutor are working with the ethical bodies to make that voice very, very clear and very heard. And I know CPCAB, from a training perspective, are doing the same. So there is a lot of focus on this topic at the moment. However, from my experience, and I've spoken at a number of conferences on ethical use of AI, and what I'm seeing is that there tends to be three camps around AI and its use. One camp is AI is bad. It should never, AI and the word counsellor should never be put together. It is a sad day when a counsellor may go to AI. Therefore, I don't want to see AI. I don't want to hear about AI. I'm not going to do any CPD about AI. It is a no-no. It's a red line, and I'm not crossing that line. I'm going to keep my practice as it is. That is one camp. There is a camp on the other side of that coin which goes, you know what, AI, this is fantastic. My goodness me. I recorded a session with my client and I popped it in AI and it was able to give me a really nice summary, and I shared that with my client and they were so happy. Both of those are very polarized views and both are incorrect. The second one being unethical as well as incorrect. But there is a middle camp, and this is the cautious person. This is the practitioner who wants to learn about ethical use of AI. What does that look like? How can I integrate it into my practice, or choose not to, but at least have the information about what it is, what it's doing, how it's doing that? Because as we started this, Rory, it's that unknown that we fill with fear, or we fill with speculation or our fantasies of what may be in the future. When we educate ourselves, I think that fades away. Within Counselling Tutor right now, we have been working for about 6 months on an ethical AI literacy course, and that is coming out in February. So watch this space. Always make sure you're on our email update list, because we'll be mailing out about that, and we'll probably have a free webinar around AI literacy as well coming up. So lots of development in that area from us as we go forward. I think we need to know what that looks like to be able to embrace it as we go forward and to serve our clients. And I'm going to leave you with this, Rory, and I think this is the most important part of this. Up until now, this whole topic, we've been focusing on ourselves. Will AI take my job? Is it going to affect me as a counsellor? Well, here's the thing. I've already hinted at this. But the real challenge is that there is a tsunami wave coming of other people in sectors that will and already have been disrupted by AI, that are losing their job, their identity, their standing in community. And if we look back in history, we can see this in the Industrial Revolution. We can see this when manufacture left the United Kingdom. We can see this when the mines were closed down. The impact is catastrophic. The people lose their entire identities of who they are, their whole career. Imagine a client sitting in front of you and saying, the whole career that I studied for at university and have been practicing for the last 40 years, climbing the ladder, has been wiped out and doesn't exist anymore because it's been totally replaced by AI. How do we hold those clients? And I think that is the real question. I think we've got to get over what is my relationship with AI so that we can be that therapist. I think we need frontline workers. The World Monetary Fund has suggested over 90 million jobs will be displaced by AI. And you look in other places, you get higher numbers, and in some other places, lower numbers. That's a lot of people that are going to be in pain, that may turn to counsellors and psychotherapists. And I think this may be a crisis where it's all hands on deck, and we need as many therapists who can at least have a conversation and understand AI as is possible. And I think that's the real work as we go forward, Rory. Great topic. Thanks for bringing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a call to arms. That's what you're really saying, Ken. It's a call
Yes,
to
it is.
arms. And I'd like to acknowledge my professional body, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society,
Yes.
and certainly Meg Moss, who has been, yes, a bit of a round of applause for Meg.
Yes.
Who's
Yes.
been relentless in reminding those in power that there is an army of therapists trained, ready to go, and can be. I use the military word deployed because I think it will need that kind of mobilization when we see the effects of AI as it rolls in and those jobs are lost. So I would say, stand by, if you like, as a general, stand by, for action. But I do think that we're going to see sadly a peak in presentations that will start with, I've lost my livelihood, my profession, everything, to AI. And it might not be a therapist that sat in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the topic, Rory. What can you do? Well, go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 364, where you'll find the show notes from today's episode. And we've created a little handout just with some of the talking points that we discussed today, just on this, will AI replace counsellors and psychotherapists, just to give you something to think about. And of course, keep an eye open. We will have our AI, ethical use of AI literacy course coming soon. In real time, it'll be February 2026 that we'll be putting that information out. So keep your eyes on those inboxes. And that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. Okay, so Rory, we're about to move on to Practice Matters. Mahmoud, he's done a number of lectures for us now. If you go into the CPD library, you can spend a day watching some amazing lectures by Mahmoud. And he met up with you for a new book that he has out.
Yeah, Mahmoud is what we would call a thought leader. His work and his groundbreaking work in diversity, equity, and practice is well known. And over the Christmas break of 2025, the publishers Routledge very kindly sent me his new book, which is a weighty tome and is really, as I say in the interview, a manifesto for change, not only within training, how we train diversity and equity, but also for those who are qualified. I caught up with him and we had a talk about his new book and who it's for and the impact it's going to have in the profession. And this is what he told me.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
I'm delighted to welcome back Mahmoud Ahmed to the podcast. Mahmoud is a presenter in the Counsellor CPD Library. He's a British psychotherapist, writer, whose work brings together psychotherapy, social context, and questions around diversity and equity. He joins us today to talk about his new book, A New Introduction to Counselling and Psychotherapy, which invites practitioners and trainees alike to think more deeply about how culture, power, and lived experience shape both distress and the therapeutic relationship. It's a thoughtful and timely contribution to contemporary practice, and I'm really pleased to be exploring it with him today. So, Mahmoud, welcome back.
Thanks, Rory, and thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be here.
It's a real pleasure, and what I have to say is, I knew your book had arrived at Counselling Towers because of the thud it made as it came through the letterbox and landed on the mat. It really is a thick tome, isn't it? It really is the first, just looking at it, I look at the book and I think, wow, that is a comprehensive book,
Yeah.
So why did you think that an introduction was needed? What did you feel was missing or limited in traditional introductions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where do we start with that? I guess we start from the idea that as we developed our mainstream theories and practices, we've had to add on stuff to it as we've gone along over the last 50 years. Examples of that could be diversity, identities, culture, environment, resources, access barriers, the resources and money and things like that. All those things have been separate. So now that we are in a place to have a look at that again, what is the helping model baseline look like today, in today's age? What have we missed in that? And as the book demonstrates, there's plenty that has been missed. Could be very useful for all of us, regardless of whether you fall into the mixture of normativity and difference and diversity too. So it's important to say this is for everyone. An example would be, do we understand social determinants of mental health and causation? That's an example of a gap. We don't typically talk about that. We don't talk about housing, poverty, educational standards, access barriers, and things like that. So that's an example of a baseline thing that we overlook, but is actually really important for us to all understand in terms of what causes mental health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you think of models like common factors, they talk about extra therapeutic factors, those factors that happen externally of the therapy room, where the client is embedded in whatever culture or situation they find themselves in, and that's always not sometimes apparent just from meeting the client. You emphasise kind of embedding context and diversity and equity into practice, rather than treating them as optional extras. So what does that look like in day-to-day therapeutic work?
So exactly, that title there is sort of encapsulating something plus more. Obviously, then we talk about embodiment, trauma, stress. All these things are sort of separate. Neurodiversity, of course, identities, beliefs, religion and spirituality, ultimate beliefs. So what it looks like in practice is that we embed within ourselves a new model for understanding human experience. By doing that, we carry it into our day-to-day work, in relationships, in supervision, in client work, and so on. So the actual answer is quite simple. We start from that position. There's a lot of complexity here. There's a lot of things, moving parts. But what we do, first of all, we understand ourselves as formative of these ideas. An easy example to understand is that we're all neurodiverse.
Yes.
Yeah. And another one is to understand we all have ultimate beliefs mostly. We all, ultimate beliefs. It might not be religion, it might be some other belief system. We all have a knowledge base that we come from into our experience and make decisions and directions. So therefore, if we understand that model and understand ourselves in that model, then we can understand the experiences of other people in similar and different ways and the dynamics we have in that. So therefore, daily practice looks like I've got an understanding of myself in these contexts, and then I can understand how it plays out in relationships. And when we look at supervision, client work, we go in with this model and say, what could be relevant here for our work in these contexts? Is it gender expression? Is it neurodiversity? Is it mind-body differences, learning styles? And is it the cultures that we come from? It may be something I don't really understand, what it's like to be in a fishing culture or a university culture or be Gen Z and so on. Therefore, these are intrinsic baselines of understanding, and therefore day-to-day looks like using that model, embedding it within ourselves relationally, and then start from there. There's a lot of nuance and lots of areas of work, body, worldviews, and so on. But keeping it simple, it is that top level understanding, and then take it from there. So that therefore, when we go to do CPD training, trauma-informed practice, whatever, eating disorder, substance, we take that model in with it. And therefore, we ask questions about normativity and diversity around that. So if we're going to a training around, let's say, eating disorders, how does that look like in different contexts, different cultures? How does that affect stress, marginalized stress, the stresses of culture and so on? How does that influence that topic, rather than seeing it as just a generic, universal topic of eating disorders? And furthermore, then what it does is then it allows people to bring in, it invites people to bring in their lived experiences from different positionalities, diversities, and normativities as well. I do want to emphasize here that this is for everyone. This is not about diversity. Even if we had no diversity, I don't know how that would ever happen. We could never have that. But let's say we have no diversity at all. You would still need this, because you still live in the context. There's still a cultural context. There's still a social political context. There's structures and policies and normativity. For example, if you talk about male inclusive identity, that can cause stress.
Yes.
Yeah. So therefore, this isn't, I don't want it to be another subject or another book, because it's about everyone together. All it's doing is augmenting what we already have at the baseline and augmenting it and saying, let's use this model as a way of testing whether we are, providing a good service, a good base of knowledge for our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the term diversity has been seen in a kind of only one expression, and that is maybe people of different religions or different skin colours or skin tones or sexualities. But what you're saying is we're all diverse. Every human being that we meet in our therapy room, and indeed down the shops when I'm buying my tea bags, everybody is diverse. Some people may buy Earl Grey tea, some people may buy Darjeeling, some people may buy orange flavoured tea, whatever that is. But we're all diverse, and to meet people where they're at in their diversity is really, really important. There is no normal. There is no one size fits all. Would that be a real
that is correct. So if that is the case, exactly what you said is, which I agree with. If that's the case, you can see how we could be missing a lot of stuff at the baseline. Yeah. If you just think about skills theory, practice, and self-development, do you see how we could be missing the basic things if we segregate it, other it, and separate it off? So therefore, when we come to talk about self-development, it's all part and parcel of that. It's a natural experience to talk about your normativity and difference. Yeah.
And everybody.
So all I would say, I'll go back to that again, is that we occupy multiple normativities, multiple differences, and therefore they're all relevant to our self-development and client work. Yes, I would totally with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say to maybe, or what would you hope that trainees and early career practitioners take away from the book?
Yeah, I think, well, the main thing is that we can look at our experience in three ways. Typically, we've thought about experiences as inner experience, which is great. Inner feelings, may feel shame, may feel guilt, may feel body image example, and then we have relationships with people. But the contextual layer then gives another layer to that, understanding our experiences. So it's the interplay between the inner experience, the interpersonal day-to-day experience, and the contextual experience. So, for example, if we take that as an example, that we're talking about body image and stress around that, we can think about the contextual aspects of messages we've been given within families, within culture, within marketing ads, within products and so on that influence our feelings around body image. That's just an example of that. So I think the key takeaway is that it will give you a more complete, enriching, and more diverse understanding of our lived experiences across lifespans, but also intergenerational and collective experience as well, because that's a big thing now, that we need to look at the whole. I call this the whole solution of the words. How does all these things play a part in it? It's quite exciting, I think, to just have a look at that basic helping model and say, add the contextual layer into it.
Yeah. And when you talk about contextual layer, my takeaway from that is that clients are so much more than the presenting issue. There's a presenting issue that we work with as therapists, but there's a whole back story going on externally of the therapy room, what we call extra therapeutic factors, that can influence things like people attending at therapy, whether the model actually fits for them, how they view therapy itself. I mean, I think that's an interesting one. I come from a very working class background, and when I trained, my friends laughed out loud when I said I was going to be a therapist and talk about people's feelings. They literally thought it was the funniest thing that I'd ever done. Do people really talk about the feelings? Said my best friend at the time, and I said, yes, they do, Stuart. Perhaps you should. And he's sadly not with us now, but he was a lovely man, and there's lots of things contextualised within society that if we don't understand them, we're not really being the best for our clients. That's my view. We need to meet them where they're at. Yeah.
And I call that a kind of empathic lag in the book. This idea that if we think that we don't need to have knowledge about, let's say, particular groups of people, impact of the environment, poverty and vulnerability factors, that if we have to be there and not have this background knowledge, we don't force that onto the client, but we need to have something to be able to meet and be empathic in the first place. So we
need to have more context of the client's lived experience than just applying the theory. If you talk about working with difference in practice, so when we meet someone who's different to us, with the caveat that everybody's different, but what guidance would you offer therapists who feel anxious or uncertain about working across, say, cultural, racial or religious differences?
I think the key thing is that you notice that discomfort, anxiety, because that is part of the context. It's not just about thoughts of bias or prejudice. It's about what the body's telling you. So that's great. I would say that this idea of embodied prejudice has to be looked at. I talk about in the book the idea that what is it like to meet someone who's homeless? What is it like to meet someone who's working class, an Uber driver? That is showing you there's some barriers that are there. So I think the key thing I would say is recognizing the usual stuff about supervision is fine, but work on yourself. What is it? Ask questions of yourself. What is it about that makes me feel uncomfortable? Is it lack of knowledge, getting it wrong, and so on? But it could be the truth. It's telling you the truth in some ways, isn't it? Because it's like, I'm not comfortable because there's something that's missing in my level of proficiency as a whole. Isn't it? Because it could be that. So we go back to the drawing board with that and saying, what I say about this is that the self-development of those contexts in that model, we need to get comfortable about talking about all those layers of it. Because when we're comfortable talking about, let's say non-binary trans people, working class, neurodivergent autism, and the experience of that, then we become better therapists because we're ready to engage rather than there's a barrier within us that sort of distances ourselves from it or swerves the topic because it's uncomfortable. We need to get comfortable, and courage is a big part of that as well.
Yes. Yes, as Mayor Angelou said, without courage, you cannot practice anything else with integrity. And I think that's very true. Therapists should be courageous. And part of that is to, sometimes we ask questions of our clients or we try to understand about them. And it might feel uncomfortable and it might feel, should I really be saying this?
Yes.
But I think if it's asked in the right way and with, with genuine curiosity and thoughtfulness, that people will respond. I've spoken to many people in many cultures and said, just to help me understand, could you say a bit more about this? And people are only too happy, in my experience, to say, of course I'll tell you about that. And, although we shouldn't have our clients teaching us about them, just to get some context, I think is very, very useful.
Yes. Yeah, meeting in the middle, be able to bridge what I know and what I don't know. Obviously, being client-centered is important. But this is also a great example, Rory, of how we can apply context to this conversation. Because I would say also then, look at our society and our culture within society. And I ask people, your students as well, to reflect on, when was the last time someone asked you a question that said, what is it like to be your race, gender, class, to have your beliefs, to have your political beliefs and worldviews? When was someone actually was curious to ask you about what that experience is like? Do you see how the culture, which is generally, let's not talk about that, applies then back into the therapy practice? Because for therapy is we are a bubble within the culture. We're influenced by it.
Yeah.
So that's a way of looking at it. That's, I think, is also compassionate as well. It also reflects on why are we not having those conversations? Absolutely. Why? When was the last time? I've never been asked for. Have you been asked? You may have been asked. When was someone asked you about what it's like to be white, gender, whatever it is?
Well, strangely enough, someone did.
Yes.
And all I will say is the person who asked me said, do you have, you're from the north, which I am, I'm north of England. And he said, for international listeners, what we're really talking about is the class system here. And it's a bit too much for us to expand on in a short podcast, but look it up. And sometimes people in the north are considered, shall we say, a bit more parochial, a little bit more, agrarian, maybe. And the fact is that we did invent the computer in Manchester, as I reminded people. But this person did say to me, do you have your dinner at lunchtime? And it was the most patronising thing I'd ever been asked, to be honest. And it was from another professional, no names given. But it was from another professional who said, oh, you're from the north, do you have your dinner at lunchtime? And I thought, well, and if I was working with that person, well, I wouldn't be going back. I just wouldn't be going back because I'm not putting up with that level of sort of being patronised. But I think what your book exemplifies, if I may say so, is that this isn't just about therapy. It's about inviting us all to understand the culture and the society that we live in. As I've not read through it in depth. I've had a look at some chapters, but it strikes me this is more of a manifesto. It's a bit of a manifesto. I don't know how you feel about me saying that, Mahmoud.
I think that's an important point you're making here, is that the book is a means to an end. Okay, it is a student book for the curriculum. It is a student book and a lecturer book for running lessons across all those 15 chapters, development, relationship, skills, causation, theory. So yeah, I think that's true. We need to the whole purpose of the book is to advocate for curricular change. So your basic diploma level course, it's demonstrating what that curriculum looks like today, aligned to SCOPED, which is what I use as the baseline for it.
Yeah.
So it maps to that. So you're right to say the manifesto word, probably. The book is really about systemic change.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have this fragmentation piece. The body is part of the context. The beliefs and worldviews are part of the kind of knowledge we hold. The identities, personal, societal, and the differences and hierarchies are all part of our lived experiences. So therefore, it's re-baselining the basic helping model. In fact, it's just a relational model. All we're doing is taking the relational model and adding the context around it. We're formalizing, making it explicit rather than hidden or implied, or, that's part of it, but it's not. So we're actually making it, this is what we need for a stronger curricula, which obviously then feeds back into client work, proficiency, reduced harm, better proficiency, better standards as well.
Yeah.
And also to say, this is aligned, remember, to our current requirements, like it or not, on SCOPED, which is that we need to embed context, difference, and diversity in EDI throughout the curriculum, not just as a separate topic. So you're right to say manifesto, or we could say an advocacy book.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it's about. To them, because what we've not had is a solution to the embedded approach.
Yeah.
So this is providing systematic a solution to it by introducing a model we can reuse whenever we think about topics, whenever we think about skills and so on. We then can carry that forward into it. So the advocacy part, and that's why I guess it's great counselling tutor advocating for helping to push this as well, and other organisations, which is great. So yeah, that the manifesto part is really important.
Yeah, I think that you say it should be read by students. It should be in the libraries of universities and training providers. I think it's one of those standard books that should be on every reading list in training. Absolutely. I also think that therapists who are really passionate about engaging with equality and understanding, that every client is different and wanting to offer the best service would probably get a lot from it. I read it and I've already got quite a lot from it. In fact, I've started to put Post-it notes into it for things that I'm going to be doing in the next 12 months. It's a really, really important read. And I use the term manifesto because I was thinking of the other book that really had that effect on me, which was Carl Rogers' A Way of Being, which was in fact still a very, very fresh manifesto of how societies should engage and what we need to think about. And I would put that, if you don't mind me saying, on your book on the same level, because it's a challenge. It's a call to challenge the profession for change. Introduction to Counselling and Psychotherapy, a new introduction to Counselling and Psychotherapy, embedding context, diversity and equity at the heart of therapeutic practice, is published by Routledge and is available from your preferred book supplier. Now, we're going to put some links in to offer students some discounts on the book. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 364 and find the podcast tab of episode 364, you'll find that link in the show notes. And it just goes for me to say, or remains for me to say, Mahmoud Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Mahmoud. Thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important topics. And that was today's Practice Matters, and we now move into Student Services. And today in Student Services, we acknowledge a gap. And it's a gap where maybe you've done your training, you've finished your coursework, you've maybe even handed in your assignment, yet you don't have your certificate to go out and practice. And why? Because you still have outstanding hours and a number of client hours. Rory, you can maybe explain as we go into this about the need for those client hours, what that looks like, how that can be derailed. But then more importantly, we're going to go into discuss what can you do during that gap. And if you are still studying at the moment and think this doesn't apply to you, it's really worth having a listen to, because it's going to help you plan for when you do come to that point where you need to hand in your hours. And you'll hear some of the challenges that counsellors in placement might face around those hours. I know I certainly did, and I know you did as well, Rory.
Well, actually, I didn't, Ken. I
you didn't?
Finished.
Oh, my goodness.
No,
it's so common. I thought it must be.
No, I was one of the only people in my cohort who went in on the last day of my course and handed in my portfolio and handed in my hour sheet. I completed my course within 2 years, and even my tutor said it was so unusual to have that, because a lot of my peers did roll on past the course. And it brings a very big challenge. You know, when Ken and myself taught, when we got into the second year of the diploma, of course, part of students passing that here in the UK, I'm talking about the UK specifically, is they have to do a number of supervised hours. So in other words, they have to work with clients, real clients, and then they have to be supervised. And that supervision ratio is quite strict for students. And the amount of hours that they have to, the amount of client hours they have to accrue is quite strict. And for some courses, it's 100. For some courses, it's 140. And I've heard that some psychoanalytical courses can be up to 400. So I think most would recognise 100 who are probably listeners to the podcast. But what does happen when your course ends and you've only halfway through your hours because you've had, you know, people who didn't attend, or you might have been late getting the placement. One of the things that Ken and myself recognised when we talked together was that when courses end, student motivation for most, not all, kind of fell off a cliff, because you were accountable. When you came to college, you were accountable. You were accountable to your peers, and you were accountable to your tutors. You know, the tutors would say, "How's practice going?" Peers would ask, "How's practice going?" And as soon as you walk out the door on one sunny afternoon in June, what happens is of course your support system falls away. You know, you're not going back to college, you're not seeing your peers, and it can be a very, very lonely slog. So I think my observation would be that if you think this is going to happen to you, and you won't, so first of all, you're not on your own. This isn't unusual. Even though some people like me finished on time, it is not the norm. A lot of people do have hours to accrue after the course is ended. So you're not on your own. That's the first thing. You're not doing anything wrong. That is quite normal. The first thing to do, I would say, is to highlight that to your tutor. Say, I'm 30 hours short. What's the college or the university's policy? How long have I got to complete the course? And get it in writing. Get it in writing, because I know of some educational establishments, the tutors have said, doesn't matter, you can just finish within 3 years, because that's what the awarding body says, or how many years it is. The tutor leaves, another tutor comes in, and then their manager says, oh no, they've finished. They should have finished in a year. And it becomes a bit of a battle. Get it in writing is the first thing. How long have you got after you walk out the door for the last time to put your hours in? And then you've got yourself a document and some evidence to argue your case should things change. Secondly, and I think most importantly, is that you need to put yourself a support system in place. So who is your support system? So I would say the best place to go for support is actually your placement. A good placement will have other students in the same position. So I would say, you know, if you're meeting in the brew room, as we used to call it, where people had a cup of tea waiting for clients, waiting in the brew room, you know, talk about that and get some kind of peer support. If you do a peer supervision group at your placement, jump on it. Peer supervision is brilliant for getting that sense of being in a supportive environment, and build as many networks around you. Also speak to your supervisor, and your supervisor, I've had this with supervisees. They've said, I've not got the hours. And, supervisors should provide encouragement, keep going, and also be a little bit, you shouldn't really be a manager when you're a supervisor, but I found myself saying, so where's your support system? Who are you seeing? What's keeping you going? Because anything that dilutes motivation may impact on the client. This is something that's not often thought about. If you're feeling, I really don't want to go on, how are you going to be when you sat in the therapy room? So you do need to build a support system around. And I would say, if you're like coming to the end of your course, maybe we're recording this in January of 2025. If your course is finishing in the June, start that thinking now. If you think your hours are going to roll over, start thinking where you can build your support system in place now, because it's a massive drop off. It's like, I've never been in the army, but it's like coming out of the army. You're part of an organisation, and all of a sudden you're out of the gate, out of the barrack gate, outside the college, with your bag, and that's it. You don't go there anymore, and you really do need to think about what support you can put in. And keep listening to our podcast. That's always a good.
Well, that's a good one for motivation. And another one. I mean, you said the best place to find that support is on your course. Is there another peer that's also got hours to submit, or a few peers? Can you meet up once a week? Can you have discussions? Because you do lose supportive elements like professional practice discussion. You would generally, within your training, could take practice discussion into a setting and get feedback on that. You wouldn't maybe be speaking about what your clients are saying, but you'd be speaking about what's coming up for you, and you lose that. And having peers around you is helpful in that. I'm going to say another resource, which is completely free to use, is the Counselling Tutor Facebook group. It's a great place to say how it is for you, say what's going on for you. And if there's people going through similar situations, they might jump in on that conversation and say that they are also going through that. You may ask, is anyone else going through this? You may then from those people say, hey, are you interested in meeting up? It's a pool of counsellors, psychotherapists, many students on there, and I'm sure many that have got hours to put in. And I like where you've put this, Rory, because traditionally, this time of year on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, we speak about finding a placement. Why? Because it's traditionally a time within counselling training where you'd be going out and looking for those placements. But you're 100% right, Rory, in saying, think about that now at the beginning. Think about those hours. And certainly, so you've got 100 hours, let's say, I'm just taking an example here, to get in. When we go into placement and we are seeing X amount of clients per week, this is how it was for me. I put a big smile on my face and said, I'm going to make my hours easily. Oh, that's easy. That many clients for that many weeks. Woohoo! Here we go. What I didn't take into consideration is DNAs, do not attends. How many of those clients actually didn't come? And it was after a few months in practice in that placement, I realized that because of the DNAs, I was working in a GP surgery, and there was quite a high incidence of DNAs within that, because I guess it's traditional within doctor's surgeries that there's always a sign, isn't there? So many people didn't go to their appointments, and it cost the NHS this much. And when we're in there, it can be the same, and we can feel that impact. So I went and found another placement. So I had 2 placements to get my hours in, and I was glad that I was thinking of that at the beginning of that journey. So Rory, I did manage to get my stuff in on time, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. It was a panic for me, and I'm going to be honest, I just made it. I really just made it. And then of course, we need to recognize that when we're handing in those hours, they all have to be supervised as well. So that's another thing that can delay slightly you putting your hours in, because I've done all my 100 hours, but I've still got 3 sessions that I need to have supervised by my supervisor, and she's away for the Christmas break, and I'm only going to see her in January. So you don't stand alone. Don't worry about it. There's certainly allowance for this with those that set the training courses. So if you look at someone like CPCAB, they've got all their policies around this. As Rory quite rightly said, find out what your learning institution policy is, get it in writing or hold it in your hand so that you can point at it and say, this is how it is, and use that time. Also, one other thing, if you have submitted your assignment, and all you're waiting for is to get your hours in, and you're looking for something to motivate you as you go forward, well, you're no longer a student. You've finished the student, you've written the assignment, you've handed it in, and you're just doing those final few hours. And in that capacity, if you wanted to, you could join the Counselling Tutor CPD library. Now, the CPD library is only for qualified practitioners. We speak all the time when in student services that we have a student library. It's very different. The student library concentrates on the learning and the theory and the skills and a smattering of CPD. But the CPD library is, I guess, the deeper level topics, the topics that you would only consider post-training, proper deep CPD, kind of the topics that we cover each week in the podcast by the experts in practice matters are the kind of things you find there. And it may be interesting to kind of keep your interest up and to look at any specialist areas that you might like to dig into. So there's ways of staying motivated, lots of free ones. One, there is a fee for the CPD library, but it's less than a coffee, price of a cup of coffee a month. We're trying to make it really reasonable price there. Any last thoughts, Rory, as we close this topic?
Well, I think it's just to stick in and dig in. It's a long road getting your hours. We see people in our Facebook group with coins or tokens. They put a token into a jar for every hour and it fills up. And I think that's a brilliant motivator. Hours on a sheet of paper can be it could be a bit flat. There's no passion to it. But if you were to get, some counters, plastic counters, and every time you had a client, you put it into a jar and you kept that on your desk or somewhere where you could see it regularly, you could see that filling up and filling up. And I think that's a real motivation, just to keep you going. And eventually, as my first supervisor said, it will all be in the past, Rory. She said to me, when I was in the middle of it and it was really hard going, she said, you'll look back on this and the 2 years will have gone by, they'll have flown by. You know what? She was right. I can't remember any of the struggle that I had in training. But it can be a bit difficult. Best summed up by the by the quote that, when you're up to your bottom in crocodiles, it's hard to keep the focus on the fact your objective was to drain the swamp. What you start off to do, where you're at.
I'm picturing that, Rory.
Yeah. So just stick with it, and we'll stick with you as well. Keep listening to the podcast, and just keep the faith, and you'll get there. And we'd love to see those celebrations in the Facebook page where someone says, "Finally done it. Here's my cap and my gown. I'm now qualified." There's no better feeling.
Indeed. And this has been episode 364 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical and sustainable practice, and we had a long discussion, will AI replace counsellors and psychotherapists? And I think we answered that as best we can, given the fact that we're in the time we are. But an interesting discussion as well, and Ken brought his knowledge and his passion to that discussion. In Practice Matters, an important interview, I think, with Mahmoud Ahmed about his new book, A New Introduction to Psychotherapy. For those who are interested in the book, might want a discount on that. Mahmoud has kindly given us a link. So if you go to episode 364 or go to counsellingtutor.com our website, our mother website, find the podcast tab, episode 364. You'll find his information in the show notes, and have a look at that. But I think it's an important book, and one I think that should sit really in every university and every training institute's library, because it forms the basis of the new way that education's being presented under Scope Ed. And in student services, when counselling training ends but the hours aren't complete, we had a talk about what happens when you come to the end of your course and you're still completing your hours. And as always, thank you so much for your likes, subscriptions, and shares of the podcast. And until we meet again, stay grounded, stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.